Welcome back to Newsmaker Live, and thank you very much for staying tuned. For those of you who missed it at the top of the show, happy holidays to you. This is our final show for the season. And joining me this evening is former Tourism Minister Alan Chastanet. We've been talking about Hurricane Thomas, the aftermath, also how tourism fed immediately after the passage of that storm in October, the end of October 2010. And before we went to break, I introduced the idea of elections, and no party, no politician, no serious politician, let me put it that way, goes into an election expecting to lose, and everyone goes in wanting to win. What kind of effect did it have on you when, at the end of the counting on November 28th, the United Workers' Party had lost, and you particularly in Soufriere?
Well, Soufriere was always a challenge. If you look back in history, in recent times, the UWP has only ever won that seat twice. One time is when there were three parties contesting them, and the Labour vote got split. So in fact, when Rivera won, he actually won from a minority, only 40% of the vote. We won it one more time, I think, with a 0.2 or 0.3. Or 3/10 of 1% a margin of victory. And so I knew I was in an uphill battle. And that's why we really tried very hard to show the people in Soufriere that I was prepared to deliver before I was asking them to vote for me. And I thought we ran a very good campaign, a very compelling campaign. At the end of the day, it was disappointing, but I accept and move on. I mean, I've never been one person who lives in the past. Obviously, it was disappointing for the party to lose, but I think it gives the party time now to reflect on some of the good things that we did, and reflect on some of the things that we have to fix. And I think that's what we're doing right now, internalizing a lot of things, and preparing ourselves for a convention next summer. And hopefully, some of the lessons we've learned will be applied to a new way of moving forward.
What went wrong, in your estimation?
A lot of things. I mean, I think that we ran a individual campaign, meaning that we ran on the strength of the candidates on a constituency level, and in the last 2 weeks, we didn't have a national campaign. So we were very slow in responding to some of the negative stuff that was coming out. And I think ultimately the Labour Party supporters on the ground were extremely hungry to get back into power. I mean, I know in Soufriere, like, we were better organized than they were on the ground, but they were just hungrier than we were. And I think a lot of people lent their support to it, meaning that not just soldiers, but sergeants and generals, a lot of good people came to their aid. And they ran a good campaign at the last minute. And I think that there are obviously some fundamental things which I would rather not talk about here. These are things that we're still internalizing within the party that we need to review and look at and try to sort out.
Now, you said you had a good campaign for Soufriere, but you lacked a national campaign as a party. Is that an indictment on the leadership of the party?
Well, I don't know if it's an indictment, but it's certainly something the leadership has to answer to. I mean, Stevenson King was the leader, and he ran its campaign, and ultimately the buck stops with him. Whether it was his fault or not, the buck stops with him. So those are things that, as a party, we have to review. He has to internalize himself, and we have to figure out, how to strengthen the party. The party has a constitution. It's the first time that constitution was in effect since we were actually in office. There are some good things about the Constitution. There were some flaws in the Constitution, like, for instance, how we handled the death of Sir John. The Constitution spoke very clearly in terms of a way to deal with that, and we avoided going in that direction. So we got to figure out why. So I think that we've got to really relook at the Constitution, and also look at the structure of the party. The party has had a very tumultuous history in recent times, from when Sir John left, handing it to Vaughan, and then Vaughan lost the elections almost immediately, and then you had 10 strong years of Labour dominance. There was the alliance that was trying to be put together, so the party structure was not looked at again. And then when we got into power, Sir John, was incapacitated within almost 5 months of winning the election. By April, he'd already had the stroke. And we were always outing fires. So I think that in moving forward, the party really has to internalize itself, redefine its motto, its mission, what it stands for, and what our overall goal is. I mean, I know that one thing for sure with the United Workers' Party, we have to recognize that the enemy is outside of St. Lucia, not inside of St. Lucia. And I think that this fight sometimes between the SLP and UWP is not a healthy one.
What do you mean by that? The fight is outside and not inside.
Well, St. Lucia's future is going to be determined by our competitiveness and how we're going to be able to compete against external forces. So the other islands, other countries of the world, we're competing for aid money, we're competing for tourists, we're competing to export our bananas. That's where the competition is. I mean, if we truly want to be able to make sure that everybody in St. Lucia benefits, and we want to eliminate poverty. And for me, eliminating poverty is not necessarily that everybody is not going to be poor, but people who want to apply themselves would have the opportunity to do so and help themselves out of poverty. I think the GDP in St. Lucia is one of the biggest Achilles heels that we have. Our GDP is just over $1 billion US. We have a population of 170,000 people. Barbados' GDP is 3.3 billion with a population of 270,000 people. And the Bahamas has a population of 350,000 people, and they have a GDP of 11.5 billion. Now, in our 1 billion, we've got education, health, security, infrastructure to be able to deal with. So it's just that much more difficult. That's much more of a strain on our overall economy to generate the monies out of a $1 billion economy. So infrastructure, and also I think that once we have an election, that we all should be unified behind one party. And we now start to see ourselves as solutions. I mean, you really have to appreciate the American system as it pertains to that. We have got to be able to move forward. And I think that that's why the press conferences that the United Workers' Party have been having and the things that we've been saying have not been character assassinations, but have been policy debate.
But why now? I mean, I remember lamenting or complaining about the fact that, the Prime Minister, the leadership, would not come out with information, relevant information for the population, for the electorate, for the people who actually put those politicians there to lead. And all of a sudden, now that the UWP is in opposition, we're hearing more from them than we ever heard from them in 5 years.
Well, I would really disagree with that.
Well, I mean, it's a stretch, but I mean, it's not too far a stretch.
Well, it's a pretty far stretch. I mean, I know certainly that from my office, whenever there was an issue, I had no difficulties in putting myself in the fire line in terms of responding to people and trying to keep people abreast of everything that we're doing. They had some other ministers that did a very good job.
Well,
they had some ministers.
Let me interject there, because I was talking from the leadership. When I say leadership, I'm talking about the Prime Minister.
Well, what I would say to you is that the United Workers' Party was not deliberately, but came across as being too individualistic. So you had strong ministers, but Steve's style allowed for that. He was not an autocratic leader, so he didn't crave having everything centralized in him, and he gave us a fair amount of latitude to be able to move. And that's why I'm saying to you that style continued into the elections, where it was still on a constituency basis and we didn't have a national vision. So maybe, and you're 100% right, that nationally we didn't have a strong enough message and we didn't deal with it. But in terms of why now, well, you learn from your mistakes, okay? And I think that there are some people coming in with some new ideas, bringing some new energy into the party, and who have said, look, we need to change this. We need to understand it's important to have a national message. And that's why we have taken, I think, a very positive step on forward in saying we're not going to come out and criticize individuals. We're not going to speak about ministers, but we're going to talk to his policy. And I think that that's really the role of the opposition. And I think a good opposition can do a lot of help to the party in power by keeping the conversation and the debate at a policy level.
Now, you said the buck stops with the leader of the party. I know that there'll be a lot of internalizing, or there has been already. Also, we will review the performance of the leader. There had been a lot of talk that Stephenson King is not the best person to lead the United Workers' Party. What can we expect going into the convention next summer?
It's still a little bit too early to determine that. I think that the party is still internalizing a lot. Right now, Stevenson King is the leader, the political leader of the party, and as a result of it, the leader of the opposition. When we get to the convention, and what we're doing is a management committee has been appointed to be able to help the party to get into that. So meeting with the constituency groups, making sure that they're properly and duly elected, making sure the delegates are properly selected, having a series of meetings prior so people know the way forward. And when the convention comes, if there's somebody who's prepared to put themselves up, they may do so. I've not heard of anybody making such a move as yet, but you know, I think that we need to make sure that if somebody does want to put forward a challenge, that they're able to do so without bias.
Are you opposed to being that person?
I've made a promise to my wife that in moving forward, I have to get a green light from her. She paid a very heavy price physically, emotionally, about me being involved in politics. I think that the first time she did it, but she didn't really realize what she was going to get into. I have two young kids. I have one child that's 9 and another one that is 6. You know, these are very critical ages. So I've made a promise to her that I will not make any moves to get actively involved directly in the front line of politics until I get a green light from her. So as I speak now, the answer would be no. But I am involved in terms of trying to help restructure the party, give the party a direction, and I'm prepared to continue doing so for the time being.
So is she totally opposed to you being in the front lines, well, at least for now?
For now, she is opposed to me being in the front line.
Okay, I want to talk more about that, but we'll take a break on Newsmaker Live. We're here with former Tourism Minister Alan Chastanet. Stay with us. We'll continue with our discussions, and later on we'll be taking your calls on the program, so don't go away.
To reverse the fiscal gap, as indicated by the Prime Minister. 3, to grow the economy through the